This is a workshop about writing poetry by Emily Ochin and Katrina Pellis.
Some discussion questions to use before going over the workshop. You are going to complete the survey about poetry in your classroom and discuss the questions. Have you ever seen poetry writing being taught in the classroom? What are your feelings about poetry and why? Pause the video now and complete the survey and discuss the survey questions and the other questions with the other teachers.
This is a short poem about poetry. Since poetry is a very elusive area of writing, I just wanted to read this to you. So, what is poetry? Who knows? Not a rose, but the scent of a rose. Not the sky, but the light in the sky. Not the fly, but the gleam of the fly. Not the sea, but the sound of the sea. Not myself, but what makes me see, hear, and feel something that prose cannot. And what else is it? Who knows? So each reader takes away something different from a poem, and it evokes feeling and emotion for both the reader and the writer. So that brings us to what is poetry. Poetry is a type of literature in which the author elicits the reader's imagination and emotions through various elements of poetry. So the first element of poetry is rhyme, and this is the repetition of similar sounds in words. So cat, hat, bat. Then there's rhythm. Rhythm is a literary device which demonstrates the long and short patterns stressed in syllables, particularly in verse form. So double, double, toil and trouble, fire, burn, and cauldron bubble. So that's an example of rhyme, or rhythm, sorry. Stanza. It's a group of lines forming the basic recurring pattern in the poem. So A, B, A, B, A, B, and so on. A simile is something using like or as. So an example is happy as a clam, hot like a summer's day. And then metaphor. It's a figure of speech containing an implied comparison. So the class was a zoo, or life is a roller coaster.
There are 5 unique qualities in language and literacy skills. The unique qualities are brevity, rhythm, focused content, strong emotional connection, and powerful imagery.
So we're going to get into the different kinds of poetry. There are many kinds, but we're just going to go over a few of the most well-known. So there's acrostic, cinquain, diamante, haiku, concrete poems, color poems, and free verse. The first one we're going to look at is acrostic. So an acrostic poem is a type of poetry where the first, last, or other letters in the line spell out a particular word or phrase. The most common and simple form of acrostic poem is where the first letters of each line spell out the word or phrase. So the example is sun. So sun shines brightly up in the sky, nice and warm on my face. The next example is cinquain poems. This is a poem that has a verse of 5 lines that do not rhyme. So it's a 5-line poem that describes a person, place, or thing, and in the first line, it's a 1-word title, a noun that tells you what the poem is about, so dogs. Line 2 is 2 adjectives that describe what you're writing about. So furry and friendly describes dogs. Line 3, all the words will end with ing. So it describes what your poem is talking about. So barking, fetching, and playing all relate to the dogs. Line 4 is a phrase that tells you more about what you're writing about. Friends when you need them. And finally, line 5 is a synonym about your title. So pets. And then we have color poems. Often you pick a color that comes to mind and use the beginning of each line of your poem to talk about that color. And the most common use of this poem is using your 5 senses. So this poem talks about the color green, how it feels, tastes, smells, sounds, and looks. And please hold, technical difficulty. Go back. All right, sorry, our computer froze. But activity 1, before we can expect our students to view themselves as writers, we must view ourselves as writers first. So now you're going to have an opportunity to write a poem that relates to you. You're going to get a partner and choose a paint chip of color that you love or despise. Using that paint color, you're going to use your 5 senses to complete the sensory color poem worksheet. So when you're talking about the color you like or despise, for example, I don't like the color black. I'm going to say, black is the sound of thunder that keeps me awake at night. That describes how I feel about black and why I don't like it. So you're going to write your final revised draft on the paint chip. You're going to share, and then you're going to talk with your peers about how you can incorporate an activity like this in your classroom.
Please pause the video and complete this activity now.
Now repeated poems for younger students, so this will be more directed towards upper A. So a Diamante poem is made up of 7 lines using a set structure. Line 1 is the beginning subject. Line 2 describes words about that line. Line 3 is words that end with ing, typically describing the first subject. Line 4 is a short phrase about line 1 and a short phrase about line 7, which we will get to. Line 5 is 3 doing words about line 7. Line 6 is 2 describing words about line 7. And line 7 is just 2 contrasting elements, so the lion and the lamb, and you're going to use your poem to compare and contrast the 2 different things. Haiku. Please hold, our computer is frozen again. Anyways, I'll talk about the haiku while it's loading. A haiku is a Japanese poem that consists of 3 lines and 17 syllables, which is why it's so hard to write them for a lot of people. Each line has a set number of syllables. Line 1 is 5 syllables, line 2 is 7 syllables, and line 3 is 5 syllables. So it follows the 5-7-5 pattern. So it's extremely hard to write these poems because you're constricted by those syllable sets. Now for concrete poems, and it's frozen again, so I apologize. A concrete poem was one of my favorites when I was growing up. It shows a shape of a poem, and the shape describes the poem. So for the cat, for example, it's in Spanish. So I'll read the hand. My hand reaches for you. My hand reaches your hand. My hand is helping yours. So it describes the object that it's portraying through the words.
Writing poetry. Reading poetry is important, but teachers need to teach how to write it as well. The success that struggling writers find with poetry makes other writing tasks seem more approachable. So having students write poetry creates a better understanding of the genre. Students make connections when they write it to themselves, and learning it is a way to share their feelings and experiences. Poetry has all the benefits in phonics, phonemic awareness, language development, fluency, comprehension, and writing.
So why do we need to teach poetry? Poetry gives students the ability to play with words and writing structure. Poetry provides students with the ability to create personal connections to their writings. Poetry encourages expression, communication, and language. So poetry really awakens our senses, helps us make connections to others, and leads us to think in synthesizing ways. When given the opportunity to choose their own topics, students choose to write about their community and figures in their lives and things they really feel passionate about. And it's too often that poetry gets left by the wayside to narrative and informational writing genres. So I found a quote from one of the articles that we read. Poetry has the potential to provide students with the art front and center of the classroom learning, encouraging the use of language for expression, communication, learning, and even empowerment. So just to continue on that, poetry really strengthens the students' abilities to use descriptive words, use audience and perspective in writing, understand rhyme, rhythm, and other elements of poetry, make connections to their writing, express themselves through writing, collaborate, and self-reflect.
Poetry in classrooms. Students go through elementary, middle, and part of high school without a lot of poetry, and then they're overexposed, which causes resentment by them. So instead, it should be simpler in younger grades for students, allowing for a connection, giving enthusiasm to all students. Students need to be gradually reintroduced to poetry and often in the classroom.
So why is it so hard to teach poetry in the classroom? Poetry seems to elicit the most amount of groans from students. and teachers. Because teachers aren't as experienced with poetry as they are with other genres, they're hesitant to teach it. Often they feel uncomfortable teaching poetry because they don't know how to teach it effectively, or because they find it elusive themselves, so they don't understand it themselves. Few teachers provide opportunities for students to read and write poetry that connects to their lives. So we give them a poem that has nothing to do with anything in their environment, and we expect them to understand and create meaning from that poem. So if we want students to understand how literature, and poetry in particular, brings them to a deeper understanding in life, we need to find meaningful ways to engage them in poetry. Writing doesn't have to be, here's a topic, now write a paragraph, in elementary or high school. So we should allow the students to come up with topics themselves instead of saying, write a poem about dogs or write a poem about summer. It should be something that they're interested in. So it's really a genre that teachers and students either love or hate because of these ideas about it.
So linking poetry memoirs to the Common Core. The Common Core has become so important in all of the classrooms, so linking poetry to it would be a great way to incorporate it in the classrooms. So these are two standards that are linked to the Common Core. Literacy W6-3A, which is engage and orient the reader by establishing a context and introducing a narrator and/or characters, organize an event sequence that unfolds naturally and logically. And then the second standard, Literacy RL7-3, which is analyze how particular elements of a story or drama interact. Example, how setting shapes the character or plot. So after allowing students to read and discuss memoirs, they should always be given the opportunity to create their own. And linking poetry and critical literacy. A writer's workshop focuses on writers and how to do the things that writers really do. So research, explore, collect, interview, talk, read, and write. Authentic approach to teaching literacy is important as well, and poetry offers a powerful medium for students to reflect on language, culture, experiences, and memories, which was found in one of our articles that we found. Strategies to use in the classroom. There's the Poetry Cafe, which allows the students to present poems that they have either read or written before in the classroom. Another strategy is to use poems to support learning, which is a great way to introduce new topics in the classroom. Also, use poems and spelling patterns, so using a poem and word hunts and word sorts to support them. And then encouraging students to use a writing technique. So give students models and a list of onomatopoeia words, which would get the students started. And then the last one is a poetry getaway. So write poems to objects that you would pack in a suitcase, or they could choose where they would like to go on vacation.
And this was just an example of 5 weeks of how you can incorporate poetry into your classroom. This was just an example of one of the articles gave us.
The setting of poetry. Children themselves, they can be themselves and embrace their own experiences in poetry. So they'll write about their personal lives. They'll be able to incorporate their primary language if it's not English, if they're primarily Spanish speaking at home. And they'll be able to speak out against injustices or things that they are against. And comprehension in poetry. So students enjoying literacy is very important, and allowing children to play with the sounds, the rhythm, and the flow in poetry. They'll be able to have fun in the classroom, and they'll be able to figure out the different parts of the poems. The students will be able to describe their illustrations, and it provides the students with language difficulties to use more meaningful words. So vocabulary is reinforced, elements of writing are employed, and the writing process is utilized as each child proofreads his or her work for clarity and mechanical correctness.
So this leads us to activity number 2. You're going to get into small groups of 2 or 3. Then you're going to get a piece of paper and markers. We want you to draw a picture about your favorite season. So if you in your group disagree on different seasons, try to find a group that you have things in common with. Or if not, you can do it by yourself. Then you're going to draw a picture about your favorite season. And using that picture, you're going to make a list of describing words using Tier 2 vocabulary words. So for example, if I was drawing a picture about fall, and I think fall is so pretty, I would not use the word pretty, I would use the word majestic or something like that to really describe the poem and using Tier 2 vocabulary. And then you're going to use your descriptive words to create a poem of your choosing. So we have, you're able to write whatever kind of poem you want, a free verse, haiku, cinquain, or any other type of poem, and we have templates of a haiku, cinquain, and diamante poem for you to use because those are the 3 of the hardest ones. And once you're done, you're going to share your pictures and poetry with your peers and discuss how illustrating prior to writing can help you during your writing pieces and how it can elicit more detailed vocabulary and a better writing piece in the end.
So before you start the activity, some strategies to share with your peers. They construct meaning from the text by connecting it to their own background knowledge. They visualize what they are reading. They relate the text of the poem to their own lives. They learn the meaning of new vocabulary words within the context of real literature and authentic conversation, so every child becomes active in participating in the learning process.
So just try to remember these things when you're sharing with your peers in the classroom. Try to visualize what their poem was. I know they have the drawing, but try to close your eyes and really imagine what it sounds like, what it feels like.
So we'll go back to the page with the activity, and you can pause the video now to complete this activity.
Now that you've completed this activity, we're going to give you an assignment. We have set out for you the article, Getting Personal with Poetry. We want you to read this article and use it in your classroom. So you're going to bring ideas from this article and this PowerPoint into your classroom. Have students draw a picture of what they would like to do over summer vacation. So summer vacation is coming up really soon, and that's something that would spark their interest. However, if you do not want to use that topic, you may choose something else, or let your students choose it. That is up to you. So after the pictures are drawn, ask the students to create a poem based on their picture. And for each one of you, the type of poem will differ because of what grade you are, where you are in your curriculum. So it's really up to you what kind you would like them to write. You can have them write an acrostic, or you can challenge them and make them write a haiku. It's up to you. And then have the students use descriptive language based on their drawings. And you can even ask them if it was easier to write the poem after they illustrated their picture. So, how can we incorporate technology into our instruction? This is just a quote from one of the articles that I've read. Creating poetry using new media views performance as a vehicle for exploration and learning, rather than a fixed product to be rehearsed and delivered as a final event. So these are just some examples of technology you can use in your instruction. The first one is Wikipost. So on this website, students are able to collaborate and post on the wiki link freely. They can collaborate with one another and post their poetry. They can work together to create a poem collaboratively, or they can provide feedback with one another. The second technology source is HyperStudio. I really like this one because students are able to upload their writing piece and create hyperlinks within their writing. So they can choose to select words where the reader would click on them and then it would bring them to a corresponding page. Or the hyperlink can even bring them to a page where the reader is doing a dramatic performance of the poem. So this provides students with creative opportunities that they ordinarily wouldn't have during writing. The third option is PhotoStory. This is a lot like Movie Maker on Macs. So students are able to bring their poetry to life. After composing a piece of poetry, the students would be able to create their own poem using the application, using words or words, pictures, sound effects, word effects, anything that they can imagine. So students can record themselves reading the poem and then add pictures and sound effects that relate to the specific poem, and then they're able to share this with classmates and self-reflect on their work. The final technology is hellopoetry.com. I'm not sure if anyone's familiar with Tumblr, but it resembles Tumblr a lot, where you can post your poems and you can provide feedback and self-reflect on each other. And since students are really accustomed to using technology in everyday life, it would be silly for teachers to not incorporate this into instruction as well. So to piggyback on technology, these are some instructional resources that you can use. The first website is gigglepoetry.com. On this website, you are able to access the poem of the day, silly poems written for children, activity examples, word games, and much more. On poets.org, you're provided with lessons, resources, materials, and pretty much anything you can imagine for a poetry unit. Just like poetry.org or poets.org, Poetry Out Loud provides the same type of information as well as Common Core connections. So you can find those standards right on the website. Poetryteachers.com. They give you sample poems that young children and even older children can relate to. They range from food fights to teacher conferences. So they give you silly examples that students can really connect to.
And now, after we've completed this writing workshop, why do you think writing poetry is important to teach in the classroom? And how are you going to incorporate poetry in your future instruction? Pause the video and discuss these last questions.
Now that you discussed these questions, here are resources which you are welcome to look at and use, and they provide you with a lot of information on how to teach poetry effectively and engaging in the classroom.